Well, I believe tonight we're going to talk about the knee and the lower leg and a bit about the foot. We've already talked a great deal about the knee. Some of this water here. We've already talked a lot about the knee when we were making these diagrams here. The knee is actually a good knowledge of the bones in here, with a knowledge of the function of the hamstring group and a function of the quadriceps group. You see, they both flow over, first the front and then the back of the knee. As I said last time, this thigh here has to have a little an embellishment or so, and that complicates the knee very slightly, but a bit. There's this fact, and that is that when we rotate the lower leg, if it's straight, we rotate it as a whole. But if we bend the knee, we can bend the lower leg independently. Now, naturally, there must be something that does that. And of course there is. It's one of these forms is very large and very important to us. It's a form that no layman has ever heard of. It's this thing here. It's called the tensor of the fascia lata. Tensor muscle artists call it. It's very important because it takes over some 6 or 7 inches of the outline in drawing on almost every pose. And I think that just points up that idea that we really can't draw a thing unless we know it exists, you see. And that's the great difference between a layman and an artist when it comes to the figure. The artist knows all the forms on the figure. He knows of their existence. He even knows of the tendon of tibialis anticus, things like that, you see. Actually, the tendon of tibialis anticus makes a form about as big as your nose, and every layman knows about noses, you know, but just these things with the queer words he doesn't pay much attention to. The tensor of the fascia lata. The tensor of the fascia lata, that means the wide fascia. It comes off the pelvic crest here, about so far, about the point to the wide point. And in my book, it's a slim egg-shaped muscle that goes about to the bottom of the buttocks. There's a principle at work there. It is how far down does it go, and what difference does it make anyway, since nobody's ever heard of it, you know? I mean, if you're drawing the tensor of the fascia lata, are you going to get a pair of calipers and measure the model to see whether it's 1/8 of an inch above the break of the buttocks, or 1/8 of an inch below? Since nobody's ever heard of it except a few artists and a few doctors, and the doctors aren't interested in the proportion of the muscle anyway, if I were you, I'd come to a convenient conclusion, which is that the incision of the fibers of the muscle are about that level. You see, that's what it means by having in your mind a kind of a secret figure. You see, you know about these things before you come to them, and your style doesn't get slowed up, you see. Now, that muscle goes into a band down here, but the band is really a thickening of the aponeurosis of the whole leg. You know, these muscles are all held in by aponeurosis, which is flat, thin gristle. And it penetrates between the muscles, and they move like swords and sheaths of aponeurosis. But the fascia lata is really a thickening of that fascia, but it makes a regular band. It has many names in the medical books. And the band comes down like this and goes into the tibia down there. About there, I guess. Gets thinner as it comes down. And now I think you can see what goes on. This is the muscle belly up here. And this, in a sense, is a tendon that goes all the way down to there. You see, if you put your knee up this way and you want to pull the lower leg that way, that muscle pulls the tendon, which goes into here, and it pulls the lower leg that way. On this great muscle here, the distinguishing muscle of man, really, there is a fibrous covering that also goes into that band. But I wouldn't pay too much attention to it if I were you, because I'd noticed that the masters almost invariably give you the feeling that this great buttocks is going into the bone behind there. The reason is, of course, that that muscle is what makes us into human beings and holds us in this splendid upright posture we've adopted rather recently. That's called, actually it's called in the book superficial gluteus maximus. It's a separate form, I suppose. But I wouldn't pay too much attention to it if I were you. I've noticed most of the masters give the feeling that gluteus maximus goes in between the hamstring group and the quadriceps group. Now, the tensor on this picture will show you how it takes the outline. It, you see, robs it from gluteus medius there. It hides the great trochanter. It would come down about like this. The band you really can't see from the front view, but you can imagine it going down there. On a woman, there's always a good deal of fat out here that further hides the band. The result is that a man is widest through his tensors, but a woman is wider a little lower on because of deposits of fat here. Now, of course, if you can find out how you rotate your lower leg this way, you'll have to figure out how you rotate it back. And that's done by the longest muscle in the body. The tailor's muscle, it's called, or sartorius, this great ribbon here that comes down. It's called the tailor's muscle because the tailors used to sit cross-legged in Rome. And if you sit cross-legged yourself, you see a great strong muscle running down there. It comes off the whole pelvic point here, and it really is like a piece of ribbon. And it runs down very much in the break here between the functions. The outside line is that. And it comes down, and then it joins the big spiral group of hamstrings that are coming around from the back and the adductor muscles. And they make this spiral mass here, as the students call it. You know, there are a number of muscles engaged in doing that. It's their tendons. It's semimembranosus, semitendinosus, gracilis, and this ribbon-like sartorius that joins into the game there. And it's really inserted about here. The result is, of course, if you wish to turn your lower leg the inward way, sartorius takes care of that. It would also lock you in balance against gravity, that powerful force, you see. So it has a certain importance. I would say that artists, in using it, more or less disregard the inner line. And they use this line here that more than anything intimates the line between the functions. You see, that's the adductor group. That's the adductor group. That's what pulls the leg in, you see, like that. And this is quadriceps. Well, with all that material, we have quite an attack going on the knee, I would believe. I guess I better take this quadriceps apart for you. Quadriceps means 4 heads, but the artists only bother with 3. The 4th head is a little hidden thing back here that you can study in the books if you wish. But this is the quadriceps group here. And it has on the outside here, on the outside of muscle that comes down, goes towards the patella. It's always directed towards the patella, the whole quadriceps. Let's take a look at the patella. You see, it's this thing. You see, what quadriceps does is to come down, take a hold of that, and straighten out your leg. That's the way you straighten out your leg, with the quadriceps group. And there are three muscles that artists notice that come down there. On the outside, we might put back the bone, feeling of it. On the outside is this great muscle called vastus externus that comes down. Now, on the bottom of the patella, and the patella in the beginning you could think of as a half sphere of bone, though slightly flattened, I would say. You can refine it if you wish. The patella has a strap, you see, that goes down to the kneeling point. That's called the lower patellar ligament. It's probably wise to keep in your mind where the bones are touching, the femur and the tibia. So you have the patella with a strap on the bottom, and then there's a upper patellar ligament that is shaped a goodie like this, and that sits, you see, on the top of the patella. That sits up there, and so you feel that form in there. You see it on strong men. And this muscle on the outside, vastus externus it's called, it grows over the bone a bit, and it goes into the upper patellar ligament. Now on the inside is an identical muscle called vastus internus. Well, not quite identical, but very much the same. That grows a little into the bone, and it comes down here, and that grows very low on the inside, following the rule that everything on the inside is very low, you see, and everything on the outside very high. Then covering these two, vastus internus and vastus externus, is a muscle called rectus femoris. Rectus femoris, that means the straight muscle of the thigh. In strong men, you occasionally see it in the group when they're in action in the quadriceps group. It starts off with a diamond-shaped ligament. And what is very important to know is that it doesn't come from the pelvic point. It comes from what artists call the secondary point, or doctors would call the anterior inferior iliac spine. That's a matter of great importance to artists, as I'll explain. This diamond ligament stops at that second point, you see, and comes out here. And, it's about so big, I think. And it at once goes into rectus femoris, which comes down towards the patella. It comes down towards the patella, and then it has its own strap, which you can see on very strong muscle models, that goes into the patella. The importance of this is that students, particularly in back views, never seem to know where the far leg comes from. But you can make up your mind now that if you feel your major pelvic point, that's this one, you're all sitting down, you feel your leg springing about one eye below, because the leg springs from this secondary point, you see. Well, artists know that is, trained artists. They know that, and therefore they don't make this peculiar sort of a mistake that other people do. You see on a 3/4 back, 3/4 back, there'll be a rib cage here. Let's get a center line and we can feel the 3/4 back, you see. And someplace down here there'll be a sacrum, you see, and a pelvic crest, one on the other side, and all these muscles we've studied, you see, gluteus medius, gluteus maximus, but this one's sitting down. That will cut off the length of the pelvis a bit. Because as you probably all know now, you're sitting on your ischium here. You don't sit on the big gluteus muscle. It would hurt it, you know. Now, we can draw this stuff, I guess, pretty easily. We know what that is, the external oblique, you know, and we know about the, not a very good center line, is it? A little more like that, I guess. We know about these strong chords that come down here. And we've been studying all these things. External oblique on the other side. And now we know that the front pelvic point is there. That is if we can see through the body. Well, I tell you, you can learn to see through the body in no time at all at a place like this league. Because you draw the model all the time, don't you see? And if you learn to put in the back triangle and the front triangle, you're seeing through the body, you see. And after you've done it 20 times, it's terribly easy. Now, we know the leg springs from the secondary point here. So it'd be awfully easy if this character is sitting down to feel the secondary point right there, you see, and the leg would come out. If we're on to the tensor muscle, we'll feel a sort of something like that, you see. But the basis of the leg comes from the secondary point. Now, how about the other leg? How about the other leg? You'll find students take it out of the most peculiar places. They take it out of the nipple, you see. I've seen them take it out of the left breast. The other leg comes from the other secondary point, don't you see? And so if I'm going to draw the other leg, I can feel my front triangle with no trouble, at my age anyway. You see, I know the little point underneath. The secondary point is there. The other leg, if we could see it, would have to come from there, you see, no matter what was happening. It might go up or down. Don't take it out of the iris or the pupil of the left eye or something like that. Go right into the truth, you see, where we all live, we artists. Strange land, but that's where we all live, frankly. So it's a good thing to learn this landmark, you see, because the important line of the front profile of the thigh goes right to it, or the top profile of the thigh in this case. Well, I would say now we had plenty of information to attack a knee. Let's try what are we drawing here? A left knee. The femur comes down at a slant and goes into a something in the layman's mind, but for us, we know the shape. It's a spool, you know. It's a spool. And this looks out that way, and the other side looks out the other way. That is, our first thought is a spool, and that's much better than no thought at all, as far as shape goes, because we're students of shape, you see. That sits on the platform of the bone below, but how can we draw it if we don't know the shape, you see? The layman would just put a kind of a cauliflower up there and let it go at that, but we're artists. And what we do, you see, is to look at it, to see what shape it is. And if you look here for quite a while, you could figure out what that platform, what the shape is, you know, if you feel it particularly. It seems to be primarily just a half cylinder. You know, that's better than a something, much better than a something. So we can put this femur on a half cylinder. But we have another problem right away. That half cylinder merges into this shaft here. What sort of a shape is that? Well, actually, it's a three-sided prism, don't you see? I hope you all know that you can have four-sided prisms and six-sided prisms and eight-sided prisms. That's a three-sided prism. Well, let's make a big plan of this. We have a half cylinder in feel. Rather shallow it is. We're below it, you see, and here we have a prism. And then, of course, our problem in shape is to get from the cylinder to the prism. Well, what you do in your mind, just run a piece of ribbon down there, you see, and one from the other side. And you've got a pretty good idea of the shape. That flattens all this out, and it is flat, you see. That's all flat there. In fact, it goes back a little there. Well, there's the beginning of a search for shape, you see. So now we know about what we're doing here. You see, we have these little curving down planes. They go into the knife-like edge of the bone here. Well, we're after the knee. Let's first of all think of the influence of the hamstring group here. The tendon on the outside is very vertical, very strong, and it goes into the head of the fibula, which is a blunt tear in shape. And so in the back view, you really see just that vertical, strong tendon, sometimes giving you a little feel of the bone, however, as if it were clinging to it. That's the outside, you see. Now, on the inside, we have this enormous spiral rope, which students seem to call the spiral mass, and which is actually partly made up of the inner hamstrings. And so on the inside here, you feel a good piece of spiral rope coming around very low, you see, and going in about here. It's pretty round up here, and flattens out a bit as it goes towards the bone there. And that accounts for the for the back of the knee, you might say. You see, in drawing, we're very conscious of what's narrow in front and wide in back, all the way down the body. You're narrow in front and wide in back here. At the pelvis, you're very wide in front. The buttocks are very narrow, you see. The knee is narrow in front and wide in back, and the body keeps changing that way. And one of the things we try to do with light and shade is to force that fact on our customers, or whatever you call them, our observers, our appreciators. So that's the back view of the knee. Now the front view, you can see pretty much, is the flowing of the quadriceps group over the knee. And we know a little about it now. We have a patella there, and the patella has a basic strap going to the bottom, the lower patella ligament, and it has the upper patella ligament, which is something like that. I don't think I can get up there and rub it out. You see, that's the upper patella ligament. We darken it a bit. And into it go the three heads very clearly, the outer head, the inner head. This is something artists mark very much, is that slopping over of the inner head there. And over the two of them, rectus femoris sends its ligament, you see. So we've got quite a good deal of knee now, but we have to think of course, the iliotibial band. I've never noticed that its influence was very great in here, but you can follow it if you have a good eye over the shapes. It goes into a bump there. Sartorius we've already taken care of, because that goes around and goes into this spiral mass. Now, I wish that was all there was, but there's something more. That patella is a bone, and if you bent your knee the way it is, it would rub over the other bone, it would start friction. And that would mean when you walk, great sparks would come out of your knee, and that would be evolutionarily detrimental, don't you know? So that had to be taken care of. And what was done was this. The celestial engineers invented a water sac, which they put behind the patella. It's called the bursar. And it causes artists a lot of trouble. The bursa is a water sac back there behind the patella. And the trouble is with this bursa is you never can tell how full of fluid it's going to be. You see, if it's very full of fluid, the patella becomes a depression, and so does the upper part of this ligament. If there's just about a certain amount of fluid, this whole thing is sort of even. If, as the artist likes it, there isn't too much fluid, then you can see the patella, and you can see the upper and lower ligaments and most of these details. There are also deposits of fat, especially in women on the knee, so that you get wrinkles across the knee, and frankly, nobody much over 24, let's say, has a decent knee. But artists are very generous, and they usually give them anatomical knees, you know, just to cheer them up a bit. But you probably notice the average knee looks like a map of the Bronx or something. It's not very handsome. But that's in your own hands. Your knees are in your own hands, is what I'm trying to say. Well, with those facts in mind, we can build knees in various positions. Let's see, let's take an outside one. And pick up an idea or so, perhaps. That would be the femur, you see, and it would go into the spool. Can you figure out which way these planes of the spool are looking? You remember here they looked out this way and they looked out that way. Now they're looking up. So the knee is very narrow when you bend it. There are a lot of funny things go on when you bend the knee. These joints here have none of the subtlety that the human joint has. They're just cheap hinges. But actually, when you bend the knee, this bone slides forward so that the whole thing squares up. There's a forward sliding movement, you see, when you bend the knee. So when we put it on the platform of the bone below the tibia, it'd be a bit like this, I guess. You put it below on the tibia there, and then you put the fibula next door. The patella, as you're all sitting down pretty much, you find is sitting about here. You have to say a little something about that. The position of the patella isn't as hard to get as you might think. What you do is just to come to a decision as to how long that strap is. Probably about as long as I've drawn it. The strap is not elastic, you see, so that it never can go any higher than perhaps I have in the drawing. But it can go lower. And you can experiment yourself when you're standing. I could do it now. Pull up your patella and drop it, you see. Oh, it seems like a third of an inch there. I can move it. On a straight leg, any of you can put out your leg and move that patella. In fact, you can go to one of these expensive doctors of physical education, and he'll tell you that that's one of the few exercises you can do while you lie down. You pull your patella up and let it go back, you see. Strengthens up quadriceps, you see. So if you know a little about anatomy, you can find out about all these exercises that the gurus teach you and what muscles are being exercised, you see. Well, a lot of you have taken these terrible things at schools and things, maybe in the army. You know, they say, go this way. See, they're putting the obliques in action. Go this way, rectus abdominis. Figure it all out if you know your anatomy. Usually they don't know it, you'll find. Talk to your guru. You'll find he probably doesn't know any anatomy. It helps a little to do it. You can invent your own isometrics. You could get a thorough workout in about 12 seconds. Just talk to this guru, I'll tell you how. They're a little dangerous, though. A little dangerous. You might pull a muscle. This is the outside view. The upper ligament isn't very prominent here. You feel on the outline there the vastus internus, and the thing cuts away a good deal like that. Underneath, you see, is the hamstring group down here. And coming out of it will be the hamstring on a curve now. the outer hamstring. That little accent used a lot by artists in sitting figures. I mean, if I draw a thigh here of a sitting figure, you see, it's this little accent there. Oh, I made it too strong. That little accent. Of course, the head of the fibula is quite a beautiful reminder of how much the lower leg has rotated. You see, you can't draw any line unless you run it over form that's in your mind, and you have to know exactly what aspect that form is in, how much it's rotated, how much it's tilted, you see. And the head of the fibula will tell you all about the tilt of the lower leg. The calf muscle comes in behind there and will begin to show. Now, we've got all the details except the iliotibial band, which you'll find will make quite a scene in this picture coming in there. The bursa, that was that water sac. The bursa won't bother you in the bent knee because you see the knee opens up and the bursa gets in there. There's plenty of room for it, so it doesn't cause you any trouble. The lower patellar ligament you'll probably see a bit going down to the kneeling point. You can right now, you can put your finger in there and find a hollow there if you care to. There's quite a difference between the inside and the outside of the knee. Let's take an inside view, left leg. See, that would be this, yeah. On the inside view, the bone comes along much the same, and the spool is very clear on the outside view, not very clear as we'll see on the inside view. The platform is underneath. Now we have no fibula to worry us. The patella, as usual, it's pointing up about 45 degrees here, sort of up that way. The outline of the quadriceps is that. The great difference is this. On this view, and you can feel it on your knee, that's the outside, the whole side of that spool is visible, subcutaneous, just under the skin. On the inside view, if you feel the inside of your knee, you'll find it's very soft there. That's vastus internus, you see. That's this muscle here. Now, of course, there isn't any other detail except this great spiral mass which tries to get as best it can into the bone there. And the sartorius will come down. You'll find a hollow there. You can feel the bone there. But that's about all it is. The inside of the knee is very simple, as is the inside of the lower leg. Well, the other details of the knee we'll take up when we start the lower leg, which we will immediately after a small recess. Thank you. Now we're going to go into the lower leg, which, point of view of the skeleton, consists of the tibia and the fibula. Of course, I suppose the foot is part of it. The tibia is a supporting bone. The fibula is principally a decoration, really, except down here where it prevents what doctors call lateral displacement. I mean, it stops the foot from jumping out here. Fibula really means pin, and it goes through the flesh, you see, but it has no function of support. These two bones are tied together by strong ligaments, so they might as well be one. We examined, I think, the front view of the tibia a good deal. We might get a touch below it so we can feel that half cylinder up there. And you see how it moves into the knife-like edge of the shaft. Now, that's a construction line, or maybe a construction plane. It's built upon the principle that if you put your legs together like this, you'll find that the adductor masses touch, the spiral masses of the knee touch, the calves touch, the ankles touch, the heels touch, and the great toes touch. In other words, you could pass a plane through there, you see. That means there's always a straight line on the inside of the leg. This bone has a beautiful little curve on it and a slight inward thrust on the standing side always. And it comes down, we run immediately into another problem when we get down here. And that is, we know we're working on a prism there, but down here we have to move to the bottom of the tibia, which is very cube-like. So you have a problem down there of how you're going to move from a prism to a cube. You see, you have this problem. There's prism. You got above it or below it? I guess below it is better. Prism, above it, or whatever it is. And that has to move down here into a cube-like structure. Very flat cube, to be sure. How are you going to do it? Well, you'll find what happens is your center line divides and goes there, and the other line goes there. And this line comes down and goes to the back, you see. And this line naturally goes there. That's the way the form moves. And then, of course, you have to refine the form. You find little bumps here and there we talk about. So we get to the bottom of the tibia here, and we do get that almost block-like feeling, and quite a flat front plane there that the triangle makes. On this side, we have the overhanging inner ankle, which really should have touched my line, though I think from the, yes, I should have come in more. That is, if you drop a line from the spiral mass there, it certainly ought to touch that ankle, vertical. And that, of course, fits over the foot. And that's the tibia. The fibula, you don't have to think too much about its shape, because the whole shaft is buried in the flesh, you see. So you would think it starts with a tear and it ends with a tear, like a man's life, or perhaps a love affair, or any of those things. Though there's a great difference. The tear on the top is a blunt tear, and the tear on the bottom is a drawn-out tear. You have to study tears, you know. That shape turns up all the time, or perhaps part of the skin of that shape. Next time you get into a terrible fight with your relatives and they begin to weep, watch the tears. See carefully where the highlights are falling and that sort of thing. Become very observant. There are all sorts of things like that that an artist ought to do. Quite occasionally here the models faint and fall on the floor, and everybody's terribly shocked, emotionally upset. But the true artists are watching the change from direct light to reflected light as the model falls to the floor. We're just not like other people, I assure you. We always have a little reason and order and clarity in our minds about things. So the fibula, which is pressed up against the corner there, that ought to come in a little more, I suppose. The fibula has a blunt tear on the back. The shaft is nondescript for us, and it comes down here, and the long tear becomes very visible. This certainly should be narrower than that. I would say that's quite important. The ankle should be narrower than the knee. And then one thing it's very hard to teach students is that the feet across here are really no wider than the knee itself. In the beginning people make enormous feet. But just remember when you were a baby and put your feet in your mouth. They're not much bigger now. I'm not sure any of you could do it anymore, but you'd be surprised. The distance across here is just as important. Yes, dear, if I can hear.
Which part of the foot is...
Oh, I'm so sorry. Across the bottom of the metatarsals. Across here. That, you see. We can measure it now, and we'll see it's just a little over half the width of the head. Just a touch, over half the width of the head. People easily make it as big as the head, always when they start to draw, the foot on the front view. Well, of course, there is a foot in here, but we just suggest it now because we're going to study the bones shortly. Let's take a look at the outside view, because then we can get the whole function of the lower leg. This view here. We'll come down on that spool, and now we see something that I think we know anyway. It's much longer that way than it is this way. That sits on the platform of the bone below. There's a landmark. That's the kneeling point. There's then a very subtle S-curve here. And we get down to the ankle itself and cut in here and come down. The fibula is up against the back corner there, and it goes across this bone or athwart this bone like that, and lands between two bumps that hold it in place. You see, that bump and that bump. We get this long, drawn-out tear shape here. As I say, the shaft isn't very important. Now we can get the whole theory of the foot. Let's take away the fibula and look at the bottom of the tibia. It's like that, you see. And the whole weight of the body, you see, comes down on that bone, and it lands on the foot, which is built like an arch. A foot is really something like this, except it has a spool on the top that is mortised, fastened in there. A few toes out here for good luck. And that thing is pushed up under the fibula, under the tibia, you see. The feel of the arch, you see it much more on the inside view than on the outside, the arch. See, foot's that sort of a thing. And it's all one piece in our mind. And all you can really do of significance with the foot is to go up on your toes or up on your heels, you see. And that's what most of the flesh up here does. But there are other things you have to do, because you have to walk over uneven ground, you see. And you have to be able to invert the foot and evert it and rotate it a bit. And of course there have to be muscles up here that do that. And as you think about those muscles, they give you some feeling of the shape of the lower leg, you see. Of course, the most important one is the one that puts you up on your toes, you see, because that drives you ahead through life, and you can keep up with the Protestant ethic. I never understand that ethic very well, because people like Genghis Khan had it, you know, and and Alexander the Great, all kinds of strange people, but that's what it's called in this country. It's reasonably mysterious. Somebody said it isn't, you hear people who make $1 million because they're driven by the Protestant ethic, but you can explain the $1 million. It was awfully hard to explain the Protestant ethic. Well, where are we anyway? We're down here at the skeleton of a foot. There's a great artist's trick to get the length of a foot. That's the kneeling point. And you move from there halfway down, and you take that distance again and come out here, and you'll find your foot will end about there. Well, we'll go into the assorted bones that make up this foot next week, next time. But there are a lot of bones in there we talk about. Now, how do you go up on your toes? Let's draw a back view. It'll help us. Back view, we'll get a new detail of the knee too that I haven't said too much about. See, it's the left leg. The femur comes down, and you find on the back of the femur a couple of little knobs. Now, the spool turns into two knobs at the back. They act actually, when the knee is bent, sort of like knuckles. And you'll find that on this platform, there's a place hollowed out for them. I think to prevent lateral movement more than anything. They show through on thin models. We've got the left knee here. We now see the back of the platform of the tibia, a little spike up in there, which is undercut here. And we just come down on the flat shaft. It's a little more exact. It's coming in a little more. And bone ends here. And of course that spool is in it. And if we think of the back of the foot now, we might just think of the heel bone as a cylinder for a moment and move off into the fog and see a little toe there. 2, 3. I guess it would be informative for later use to draw an inside view, which is about what you'd expect it would be. Watch that little S-curve. Now we have no fibula to bother us. And we can see the ankle here sort of spilling over the foot that is in there, you see. This is the inside now. Be about that long, I suppose. An awful lot of padding under the foot. We have to keep that in mind so that we don't get too shocked when we walk. You see, this body is full of shock absorbers. You've got a good layer of padding under your foot. There are little paddings in between these joints here. There's beautiful pad between each vertebra, all the way up to here. So you walk along, you see, but your brain gets this beautiful, smooth Cadillac ride. No jokes. That's all figured out for you. Helps you to keep sane, which is pretty hard. Well, this is supposed to be a inside view. You'd see the big toe here, just for future reference. Now, let's see how you go up in your toes. You have a great strong muscle in the back here. It has a great strong and famous tendon that goes into here, you see. And when the muscle pulls, it pulls your foot that way. That tendon is called the Achilles tendon. That assemblage is called the calf, or gaff, they say in this town. The calf group. Very few people know that it's a group of muscles, but it is two muscles that go into the Achilles tendon. The Achilles tendon rises much higher than people think. about halfway on a woman and even higher up in a man, and prepares to receive the muscles of the calf group. Those muscles are, first of all, let's put an Achilles tendon here. Comes off the heel, you see, and goes up. It ends in two beautiful half moons. We haven't got any fibula here. We really ought to have one. There's the top, and it comes down. And you begin to see it down here very clearly. And the Achilles goes up, and artists have a trick. That's why I had to draw the fibula. And they draw a line this way because the outer ankle is lower than the inner. And they take it out here, and then they draw it the other way because the top of the Achilles tendon is lower on this side than it is on the other. I hope everybody knows why it's called the Achilles tendon. If you don't know, just talk to the intellectual next to you and you'll certainly find out. It's a beautiful story, but we haven't time, is the trouble. Now, there are two muscles that go into the Achilles tendon, and they make up what we call the calf group. One is called the soleus. That means the soulfish muscle. That gives the leg beauty. And the other one is called gastrocnemius. That means frog belly. That gives the leg strength. Soleus is like a soulfish. It grows off the back of the tibia and fibula and goes into the Achilles tendon. It's very thin, quite low, soleus. Here it would come out of here, you see, and go in about like that. We could run the Achilles up here if we wished. Get a half moon. Oh, no. The Achilles is really one of the few concave contour lines on the body. Another one is back here, you know. There are very few. Now we can bring the soleus into that. And then we can go after the calf. The calf muscle actually originates way up here on a tendon. And that flows over on two tendons. They flow over there, then you get the actual belly of the calf muscle. What is very important is that plane there. Beginners, when they draw a leg, they get to the knee. They'll always go out like that. But that's a long, low plane, that plane. On here, we could see the two tendons coming off the top of these knobs. And they immediately move into the two bellies of the calf. And those bellies go down about as wide as the soleus. And they go into the Achilles tendon, you see. Here, of course, you just feel the ordinary movement. Long, low plane before you come in. Now, it's true that that's a group. So therefore, the line here between soleus and the calf itself, gastrocnemius, is never very clear. It's all one mass. That line wouldn't be very clear. What is terribly clear here is one of the most important lines between the function on the body. If we study this line carefully, we'll find the calf muscle, actually, the gastrocnemius, overlaps there, comes in like that. And then soleus takes hold. And then another muscle artists never study that goes in under the foot. But you see, that line there is a very vivid line between the functions. Because, of course, this bone supports you, you see, but that's the tension member that pulls you up on your toes. And artists are very fond of that line and always use it. So I think that explains how you go up on your toes, you know. And of course, you have to remember that muscles and muscle groups are always antagonistic, like unhappily married couples. They're always pulling against each other. So at once your mind ought to think, well, what works against the calf? That's the muscle that I mentioned briefly earlier. Very important to artists. It's called tibialis anticus. It means the muscle in front of the tibia. And that will put you up on your heels, you see, which is the opposite function of the calf. Tibialis anticus, however, is simply part of a large secondary group that we have on the lower leg that is called the perineal group. And it fills in, you see, this space here. It's a group that fades away into tendon about down this far, I think. And we'll go into it quite thoroughly. It would be quite hard for me to teach this to you at this lecture. Those who want to learn these things, I think will have to do a little outside work. But you see, as on the hand, these tendons are very important, because any line that carries over form, of course, betrays the shape of the form as well as the direction of the form, you see. So artists try to learn all these tendons very carefully on the foot and on the hand. And of course, they're interesting to us from the point of view of what they do. You see, they have to accomplish all these functions the foot has when you walk over uneven ground, like the lava. Many of you have been to Honolulu. They have these terrible lava beds. If they're very rough, the natives there call them pa hoi hoi. But if they're very smooth, they call them ah. I don't know how many of you can speak Hawaiian here. Many? I don't see many hands up. And the foot has to adjust to all this sort of thing. So we have in this group, we have 6 muscles with long tendons. And they're arranged in this fashion. And they'll be in all the books if you care to go after them. That sort of business. They're all collected together, the bellies, and very few artists ever give you any distinction of these bellies except for the front one. That's the famous tibialis anticus. I think on this view particularly, the tendon comes down here. It seems to escape the binding of the ankle, and it goes to the very middle of the foot. You see, that's why I said it was as big as your nose. And you can see that it opposes the calf. It is, in a sense, a check tendon. You use it a lot when you go downhill or downstairs. It fights the whole force of gravity, you see, as you let yourself down. I ran into it in Paris years ago. I went to the top of the Eiffel Tower with a beautiful girl with red hair and violet eyes and all that sort of thing. And she said, "I bet you don't dare go down this tower on foot." I said, "Why? Of course I do." And I started down this tower, and about halfway down I began to get terrible pain in the front of my leg. Of course I didn't know what it was. Of course I learned a different kind of anatomy afterwards. You see, I learned this anatomy. It was tibialis anticus kicking up, because it has to let you down as you take each step, you see. And so I got to the bottom of the tower, and I felt this terrible pain, and the girl was already there. She'd come down in the elevator. But you know, as they say, that was long ago and in another country, and besides, the wench is dead. So there. Well, this view, tibialis anticus just pokes forward just a bit. But the tendon, the artist tries to remember going all the way to the middle of the foot here. We'll see exactly where these tendons go, but we have to know the skeleton first, of course. Paris in the 20s. Now let me see. You see what goes on here is this curious business. When you look at the front of the leg, you see the back. That you can see in that flayed figure there. You see the calf when you look at the front, you see. On this side, of course. You see here, you would see the calf muscle coming down. And then in here, tucked in here, would be the perineal mass, which would cover the fibula. And gradually it fades away about at this level. That's the perineal mass. And we took up tibialis anticus, which is the front muscle of the perineal mass. And its tendon would come down here and be very visible. The next muscle, that's tibialis anticus. The next muscle is called the special extensor of the great toe. It's terribly visible about here. It seems to be bound down in here as the other tendons are. But it goes down to the end of the great toe. And it's tucked in here, and I don't think you'll ever notice it. That's the special extensor of the great toe. This one is the common extensor of all the toes. That's tucked in there, up there, and the tendon really doesn't appear till about here. And it sends a branch, you see, to the end of every toe, including the little toe. But I'll put them in green next time when we do the skeleton. You can see these tendons. The next one is a minor one called peroneus tertius, third perineal. It sends the tendon down to quite an important place, though. On the outside of the foot is a great landmark for us. On the foot, on the hand, it is it's this big bump here on the beginning of the metatarsal. And we have the same thing on the little finger. It's a guide point for artists. And that tendon goes into that and is often drawn, you see. Then we have these two others. This one is called peroneus longus, and that sends the tendon down, does quite an extraordinary thing. It comes behind the ankle, you'll see it very often, and that tendon goes all the way under the foot and holds this transverse arch in tone. And if you injure that muscle when you go skiing on these weekends, you'll have a lot of trouble with your feet, I assure you. The next one is the little perineal, they call it, and that again sends a tendon into the metatarsal, the bump there. Dividing these two last ones is a well-known tubercle. These are the sort of things that artists like Dürer and Dali, I hate to put them in the same phrase, but they understand these matters. This is a kind of a plain surface here, and people are called upon to decorate it sometime by tendons of that sort. I think that's the story of the leg pretty much. I haven't given you the function of these tendons in detail, but I think you can easily figure them out. Frankly, the tendon of the common extensor comes down here and seems to bury itself in the foot about there. And you can play it against the long big one here, and you get a sort of a long upside down triangle that artists are fond of, because it carries the flow, you see, from the lower leg into the foot. You can play around with these things. I suppose what we ought to do is just get the feel of the big contour line around here. You see, you go over the calf and over the bone and around the perineal mass and around the back. You can make a cross section out of that It's one of the most informative in the body, you see, because it'll teach you how to shade. You see, if you want to learn to shade simple things like cylinders. See the cylinder in there? See the overriding cylinder. Two planes will teach you how to shade. Find out what two lights do to two planes, and you can do illusionary shading. Get a hold of that counterline. It's terribly cylindrical there on almost everybody. Occasionally on very strong men you will see the individual muscles, but mostly tibialis anticus and the two perineals. The counterline comes around, you see, and goes over the bone. On this front view here, that bone is right under the skin all the way down. And artists like to say it can be a ribbon of light or a ribbon of shade. You see, if the light comes from that side, of course, you can see the ribbon of light right on the bone. The bone is right under the skin. Then you'd move into shade quite rapidly as you left it. And you feel two very strong planes there. The knife edge of that tibia is really almost always the meeting of major light planes. Well, you go on with detail, but it's all in the books after all, for anybody who wants to find it. So I suppose we ought to talk about general matters. Perhaps we should talk about talent. You know, artists have to have talent. It doesn't matter so much in the other world, in the business world. You really don't have to have talent. Irving Berlin wrote a little something once. He said, "My uncle down in Texas can't even sign his name, can't even write his name. He signs his checks with X's, but they cash them just the same." But you know, we don't get off that easily. We have to have talent. And talent is a gift, you know. Talent is a gift. The religious people would say it was a gift from God, and the scientists would say it was a happy arrangement of genes, you see. But what I wanted to tell you was that you really have to accept your talent. Otherwise, you'll end up with the shrinks, which is a terrible thing. There are lots of people in this town who won't accept their talent, and they're very visibly disturbed. William Blake, who was the greatest combination of poet and artist that ever lived, you know, wrote a poem about this. And the poem goes, "Every night and every morn, some to misery are born. Every morn and every night, some are born to sweet delight." I have a feeling, since you've all had the fortuitous intuition to come to the Art Students League, you undoubtedly belong to the second group there. Thank you.